It seems like a dumb question to ask, but it is that thing of you have to ultimately ask where is the money in a lot of these approaches, and if you don't, you often end up chasing the wrong end of the stick. And then the second question, again tremendously complicated, and I'm asking you for a simple answer. Sorry about that. Is your opinion of this WWE/UFC style of promotion these days, where almost the brand of WWE is synonymous with wrestling, the brand of UFC is synonymous with MMA, and the strength of those brands corresponds to almost the strength of the genres. And when they do badly, the genre does badly. Or you don't agree with that? Okay. So my question was going to be whether or not you think that's a wise practice, considering you've seen the advent of Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey come and go. The brand subsides, but it doesn't quite see the success it once did, but it still sees a good level of success. But you disagree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do.
Sorry about that. Okay, go ahead.
They're exactly the same. And that is that it's just that UFC started, the reason the UFC had the massive monster success that it had was simply because of one thing and one thing alone. And if you go back, you can listen to Dana White even say it. And that is the advent of when they copied on Spike TV, Tough Enough, and they made Ultimate Fighter. He even said himself that it was a complete knockoff of Tough Enough, and that the show allowed the audience to relate to who the fighters were and therefore care about why they were doing it. So they adopted what wrestling had been doing for decades, and that was we were the best at selling who and why. And then UFC, baseball, football, basketball, soccer. If you watch soccer and you see commercials for an upcoming match, it's about a particular one or two players facing a particular one or two players on the other team and why it's so important for them to win. They just took all of what we did in wrestling and now they do it better. Period.
It's a frustration that gets to me to this day when people sneer at the fandom of professional wrestling. Where you go, you do realize the UFC had a bad motherfucker title. Does that title have any legitimacy in the MMA realm, or is it just a gimmick to sell a particular match that all of you fuckers bought? And who held the title, by the way? The Rock was the one that handed it over. Are you not seeing the parallels? No, don't see any parallels at all.
Because professional wrestling, real professional wrestling is catch wrestling. And catch wrestling was the initial mixed martial arts. When UFC first started, it was not like it is now, where it's its own discipline. There were literally a guy with long style karate facing a boxer,
with one glove,
sumo wrestler facing a wrestler, a Muay Thai guy facing a Kung Fu guy. Some styles had strengths, some had weaknesses, and then it started developing to where everyone had a ground game, everyone had a stand-up game to some degree. Well, that wasn't the way it was. And in professional wrestling, if you want, a prime example that prior to the UFC was UWFI, where in Japan, where a bunch of wrestlers got together and said, we're not doing this other stuff anymore. They stopped shooting each other in the ropes. All matches either ended with a submission or a knockout. They only were allowed to strike with open hands. They were allowed to throw, kicks, and they were allowed to then grapple and go for catch holds on joint locks. And that is exactly the same thing as what they do in the UFC, except for they do it with gloves and they allow them to punch with closed fists. And, for a UFC persona to go to wrestling or a wrestler to go to the UFC, it's not far-fetched for them to do that. When you really understand what it is you're out in the ring attempting to do, you're really trying to do the very same thing that they're trying to do on a real basis. You're just trying to do it in a cooperative way. That's it. And, and everyone has lost an understanding or a touch with that because that is not intrinsically taught anymore.
Which brings us back to the Marvel DC thing where we want people to just cheer for the sake of cheering rather than get so invested in a story that I desperately need to see the second one. I will sell my grandmother on a stick to see Marvel Endgame.